I wanted to talk about today is how to write better email, cover letters, some of these types of writing that doesn't exactly fill any one niche. Because there's lots of writing that we do, right? There's everything from homework to abstracts for meetings, big research papers, grant proposals. These are often hundreds and hundreds of pages. Maybe if you go into industry, you'll be writing standard operating procedure or owner's manual. And the thing is that the trick to good writing in all of these is to be thinking about who's going to be reading it, right? And so I could give you a whole separate lecture about how to write a grant proposal, how to write a fellowship, but it's not going to be the same as how to write an email or how to write a research paper, because they're different kinds of writing. And so part of the trick of being a good writer is to, calibrate your writing to the type of writing that you're doing and to always be thinking about who's going to be reading it. So this is a few years old, but I guess in 2016, there were about 2.4 million emails sent every second. The people you are trying to reach often have too many inboxes and they have too much mail in those inboxes. But email is often the preferred means of communication, right? Like there's many other ways of reaching me. I have text, I have social media, I have Slack, even though I haven't spent the energy to become completely vested in Slack. And the same thing with the other people you're trying to reach. Like there's other ways, but email is often the way they want to see it because it's in a defined place. It has a really nice timestamp. It's fairly secure. And so I don't see email going away anytime soon, at least for these kinds of certain applications. So how to get what you want, right, when you're using email. And what are the things that you usually want when you write one of these big important emails? Well, you probably maybe want a job, whether that's, hey, Professor so-and-so, can I join your lab? Hey, Professor so-and-so, can I borrow a piece of equipment? Hey, so-and-so, can I, would you like to collaborate on a project? You're generally, at least from the way I'm prepared this talk, you generally want something. So there's different parts of an email, and the most important is probably the name, followed by the subject. Name and subject are probably the most important. Then there's the body, which is like the bulk of the message. And then sometimes there's an attachments, which is like extra stuff. So you want to use these to get what you want. So your goal with the email, if you're trying to get this person to do something, step one is to open it, right? So to not have them send it to junk. 2 is to read it. 3 is probably to, have them open the attachments, and then if it is an attachment, and then 4 is to have them do something, right? And so maybe that is, yes, you may, come sit at my group meeting. Yes, you may borrow my fancy microscope. Yes, you may, whatever you're trying to get out of this person. So let's look at some examples of bad email. So here's one, and I'm not that important. I'm like a mid-tier person at a upper mid-tier school, right? And I still get about 3 to 4 emails like this a week, right? So if you're trying to get into really fancy lab at really fancy school, those people may get 3 or 4 emails a day, right? So I get a lot of emails that are like this. Dear Professor Jokerst, I'm a master's student, and when you see XXX, that's just me making it anonymous so I don't out this poor student who sent me this awful email. Dear Professor Jokerst, I am a master's student in blah, 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 who just finished comprehensive exam last week and would like to continue to pursue a PhD degree here. I am looking for my PhD advisor now, and I think I have interest in your research. Is it possible for us to meet and talk about the possibility of me to work in your group? Do you have time next week? My CV is attached below. So the person who wrote this probably thought this was a pretty good email, right? And oops. The reason, they're kind of including the main things, right? They're including a little bit of background. They're including some, an attachment. They're including an action step. There's clearly something that I need to do. The problem is that I just get so many emails that read exactly like this. So here's like the very next day, I got this email. Dear Professor Jokerst, I am blah, 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 a new PhD student in the blah, blah, blah program. I am looking for an advisor and am very interested in your research. Can I make an appointment with you to introduce myself and know more about your researches? My resume is as followed. Look forward to the reply. So do you see how these are basically the exact same email, right? Like the text is slightly different, but everything about it, these are basically the same, right? It's vague. It doesn't tell me what this person is bringing to the table or what this person offers. There's no incentive to open the attachment. It just kind of, these kinds of emails just go into the background, right? Unfortunately, I just keep mentally triaging these because they all start to sound the same. So here's a case study from a couple years ago where I was hiring a postdoc. I had some new money. I wanted to hire a postdoc. And so I took the time to write this advertisement, and I took the effort and money to pay to have it be in a professional job board. And I said, a postdoctoral position is available to study contrast agent development for in vivo applications of molecular imaging. Our laboratory uses imaging data to study molecular mechanisms related to cancer and heart disease. The primary goal of this postdoctoral fellowship is to create novel chemical probes useful in therapeutic drug monitoring. These probes will be used in tandem with wearable devices for real-time patient monitoring via imaging data. Side projects will be encouraged, including those that use imaging for blah, blah, blah. Here's what I'm looking for: a PhD in one of these fields. I want you to have published. You should be highly motivated. This is the kind of stuff that is in almost all job applications. You'll get to live in beautiful La Jolla, California with its fantastic climate. Please send me a cover letter as follows. So within, I think, 2 days, I had 61 responses. And so there were all sorts of kinds. And so there were the lazy kind. Dear sir, here's my resume. Good luck. Here's the resume with best regards, right? So these are kind of the extreme, right? This is when you know, wow, this person would really be lazy if I hired them, because they can't even take the energy to write more than 3, well, really 2 sentences. So this one maybe is slightly better. Here's my CV. I'm applying for the postdoc. I have a lot of industrial experience, but you know what? My mind immediately snapped shut. I didn't read any further because they didn't capitalize I, right? I mean, the I should be capitalized. And so unfortunately, like, my mind just immediately snapped shut. Now, if I had only had 2 applications and one of them was, here's my resume, good luck, and the other one was, hey, here's my CV, I have synthetic organic chemistry experience, but I had 61 applications in 2 days, right? So I kind of could be a little picky. And so triaging someone who didn't take the time to capitalize the I, when that's a standard rule in standard English, just saved me a lot of time, right? Because now I don't even have to open this person's CV, right? Because I know that they don't have very good attention to detail, and I need attention to detail, okay? So if it's a really important email, you should treat it just like your other really important pieces of writing, meaning you should write it, you should sit on it, you should look at it the next day, you should send it to your friend and say, how does this read? Right? I mean, if you're just spamming random professors your CV hoping to find something that hits, then, you know, maybe you can just be a little sloppy. But if you really want this job, and, you know, generally in academia, there's only like 3 or 4 labs that are, you know, at least at any university, that are kind of a fit to what your interests are, you should probably take your time and, you know, treat this as an important piece of writing. Okay, so then there's this bad email type B where they want to tell you their whole life story. Okay, let me introduce myself. My name is blah, blah, blah. Well, I already know what your name is because it was in the, you know, I saw it from the email server. So here, the way I color coded this is red is stuff I don't care about, and black is the stuff I'm looking for. Here's how people read these emails. They're just skimming it for the keywords that make it a good fit. I began my research career, doctoral student. Okay, so biotech at blah, blah, blah university with Professor so-and-so. Okay, do I know Professor so-and-so? Then I worked with other professor. Oh, I know this person. But major human diseases. Okay, what does that mean? Then this work, okay, you published in internationally reputed scientific journals. What does that mean? Like, they're all in science, or, I mean, what? Tell me, what are the specific journals? I studied MCAO. Oh, okay, I know that disease. Oh, wow, you know about rat models. Okay, that's great. Then I went to NIH. I don't care about this. I published in this journal. Okay. So here's how people are reading this, is that they're skimming it and they're looking for the things that are really important to them, right? So that's why writing email is hard, is because you have to writing good email, you have to tailor it for every single person. So the email that you write to get a cover letter in, or the email you write to get a job in my lab, is going to be different than the email you write to get a job in Adam Engler's lab, right? It should be quite different, even if your skills are the same. Then they keep going, This is kind of too long. There's this kinds of filler. And so generally on these kinds of, can I have a job letter? Can I use something? You can get by with, you know, maybe 2, 3 to 5 sentence paragraphs, right? That should be everything. These other kinds of details is what goes in the CV. So this is slightly better. Dear Professor so-and-so, I want to be a postdoc in your group. I completed my PhD. These are good details. You want to know this. This is kind of vague. I want to continue my training. I worked with Professor so-and-so. Oh, okay. Gold nanocages, controlled release, organic fluorophores, Sensac treat. Okay, cool. This is a pretty good candidate, right? So they probably could have stopped with this paragraph and just closed, because when I went through green is stuff I really care about. There wasn't a lot in this second paragraph, right? I'm a quick learner and highly motivated, always eager to learn something new. I developed my teamwork skills. That kind of stuff always falls flat, right? If you email someone or like, you should hire me because I have great teamwork skills, at least, I don't know. I don't know many professors who are like, oh, this is the person for me. They have great teamwork skills, right? Like, we want someone who can go into the lab and on day 0 do at least one thing. Like, tell me like, is the 1 or 2 things that you can do right now, and tell me how that's useful to me. Okay, because it's just non-specific, right? Like, everybody has a multidisciplinary background, right? So that's why this kind of text is just not very helpful. Okay. And feel free to jump in if you have any questions. So here I kind of shortened this email into something that is more useful. I'm including this for FYI. If anybody wants these slides, you can email me and I'll send them to you. This is another one that's pretty good, right? This is about the right length. Hey, greetings from XYZ University. That's a pretty good opening. I'm working with Professor so-and-so towards my PhD in biosensors. I've done this, enzyme nanobio. Okay, so see how this is specific, right? Like this is specific skills. This isn't I'm great at teamwork. I'm good at bioimaging. Okay, great. Well, remember my advertisement? I said specifically that I was looking for bioenzyme. Oh, wow, you're doing enzyme activity, nanoparticle synthesis. Okay, that's also of interest. Like, you sound pretty perfect. I've gone through the publication. Uh-oh, they didn't capitalize I, but maybe I'll let it slide because it's buried farther down in here. I'm going to finish my PhD in 2 months. Okay, that's generally something. When can you start is a common question. So this is slightly better. But remember, what is the dream candidate? Like, what would be the perfect email for this job? Well, I took the time to write this email, this whole advertisement. So if someone said, I have a background in contrast agent development for in vivo applications, right? That's explicitly what I said. The primary goal of this fellowship is to create novel chemical probes for drug monitoring, right? So that was something I did a lot when I was applying for jobs. The last time was I just recycled some of the words that were in their job advertisement. So if they said, I want someone who is great at plasmonic nanoparticle synthesis, I would say, I have multiple years of experience in plasmonic nanoparticle synthesis, right? And that's only one of the things that I can do. But when I was applying for that job, I just recycled the words that were in the advertisement and sent it right back to them. This is especially true when you are applying for industry jobs, because in industry, the first person who reads your application is generally a computer. And so these computers are just doing search term. They're just searching for keywords and popping out people who match the most keywords. So that's pretty important in industry. Okay, so this relates to your recent paper in XYZ journal because it could increase the blah, blah, blah. Like these kinds of sentence structures are really useful. Particularly when I get an email from a candidate who said, hey, I read your paper in biosensors and bioelectronics. I read your paper in Angewandte Chemie. Right? Like that shows that they are actually pretty interested in joining my group and they're not just spamming me with another 100 other faculty. Okay. Okay, so remember that your email strategy is to have them open it, read it, open the attachments, and then reply. So if the goal is to get them to open it first, the first thing that they see is the name and the subject, right? So do they know your name? If they do, that's great, right? But they probably don't, especially if you're writing someone to get a job. So I think the subject line is perhaps the most underrated element of emails. People always mess up the subject line. They always bomb it. They send things like this: interested in your research, important, seeking postdocs. And the reason these are bad is because this is the same thing that everybody else, all 61 people that wrote me for a job for that one postdoc, use something like this. I'm going to show you. Look, application for postdoctoral research associate, postdoctoral position application, postdoctoral job application, application for the postdoctoral position, application request for, do you see this? Isn't this crazy? So here's one that's slightly more specific: from the University of Buffalo, postdoc application, application of postdoc, postdoctoral fellow. Like, I'm not making this up. This is how these things always look. And it just makes them not stand out. It makes me feel exhausted. It makes me feel like I have to root around through these 61 things and hopefully find somebody who can actually help me solve my research problems, right? This doesn't make me feel good. So what can you do? Well, use the subject line to get them to open the email. The subject is like the abstract of a paper or the title of a paper, right? Where the point of a title or the abstract is to get people to read the rest of the manuscript. So you can what's called name dropping people that they may know, right? They may not know your name, but maybe they know other people's. So when I was applying for faculty positions, this was the subject line that I used in every email that I sent. Stanford/Gambier postdoc with K99. So with this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 words. And with these 5 words, I immediately communicated, okay, I'm coming from Stanford University. I work with Sam Gambier, who, if you're in the space of imaging, you know who Sam is, you know that he's good. And I am a postdoc, and that I have a K99. So this is this NIH grant that's worth $1 million. So with 5 words, I told them, I'm trained with a great person at a great institution, and I come with $1 million. Like, I didn't get interviews at every place I sent this email, but I guarantee you they read this email at least, okay? Maybe you aren't at Stanford. Maybe you're not with one of the best imaging people. Maybe you don't have $1 million, okay? So that's fine. You can still get people to read your email because you can do things that are personal. Maybe you can say, you know, leveraging your PNAS paper. Hey, I just read your PNAS paper and I thought it was so interesting the way you used the laser to do blah, 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 right? Like something that just makes you stand out. If in my postdoc search, if I would have gotten a single email that would have said something like, expert in photoacoustic spectroscopy seeks postdoc. Wow, that would have made my life so easy, right? I could have instantly seen, oh, wow, this person understands photoacoustic spectroscopy already. This person understands probe design, this, right? Just something other than, hey, can I have a job? Right? That's what most of these are just saying is, hey, can I have a job? And, you know, to the person who's sending the email, that probably makes sense, right? That's what they're trying to get. They're trying to get a job. So they're formulating the email around the purpose of, hey, can I have a job? As opposed to taking the time to think about it from the perspective of the person who's going to read the email, right? Remember, I told you the secret to clear writing is to thinking about who's going to read it. And so if you think about this from the perspective of who's getting it, they just need someone to help them push this project forward. And so if you come at it with, hey, let me tell you about all these great skills that I have that are going to help you solve your research problem, that's a much, much better way for them to say, yes, I want to hire you, right? Maybe they don't know your name, but they know your PI or they know someone else at your institution. So say you work for Al Pisano, who's the dean of the Jacobs School, and you could say, hey, can I borrow your flow cytometer? By the way, I'm Al Pisano's student, right? They're probably going to let you use the flow cytometer, right? So these sorts of little things make a huge difference, right? Because it's only 5 words, 6 words. Okay, so now they've opened it. Now what? Use a professional greeting, dear Professor so-and-so, you know, dear Dr. so-and-so. I personally hate it when people say, I hope you're doing well. I hope all is well. I hope you're doing well in this pandemic. I feel like that time has passed, but if it makes you comfortable to hope that someone is doing well, then I guess you can. But I can tell you that it doesn't make you stand out because everybody these days is hoping that I am well. And I just quit doing it about 5 months ago. I'm like, if they're not doing well, they won't reply to my email. Maybe I'm a jerk, but that's just, I don't need to ask if everyone is well. And to use a professional greeting, do not use TET-speak, do not use emoticons. And then one of the tricks, if you really want to get what you want, and it's rare, is to start talking about them, not you, right? The default is to say, dear Professor so-and-so, hey, I trained at, this university with this professor, and now I'm graduating soon and I want to join a lab, right? That just kind of feels more natural. But one trick that I stole from this guy, and you can read his book if you're interested, is to start talking about them. And it takes effort, it's rare, but it stands out. So what would that look like? Well, maybe, here's the opening. Rather than saying, I hope you're doing well, snooze, put me to sleep. If you started the email with, hey, I really enjoyed reading your work on Bayesian statistics when I was a graduate student at UC San Diego studying with Darren Lapomi, right? Like, that sentence communicates so much. It communicates that you're an ambitious person, that you're reading about these different kinds of statistics. And then, by the way, it says, oh, I'm from UC San Diego and I'm with Darren Lapomi. And it kind of strokes their ego, right? Because we all publish these papers and then it goes into this ether and, nothing, whatever happens. But so here's your chance to say, hey, I read your paper and I'm interested in it, right? Maybe you're trying to borrow somebody's equipment. So you could say, your recent paper in optics letters was really impressive. I particularly like how you used the OPO laser to do blah, 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 right? Isn't that so much better than, I hope you're well, can I borrow your OPO laser, right? Like, if you think about just the human element of it, okay? Another example. My friend Fong Chen told me you were so helpful when she did her flow cytometry experiments and that you had lots of experience. So maybe you're trying to get a hold of someone in a core facility and they do histology, or they do flow cytometry, or they do electron microscopy, or, there's dozens of these cores across campus, and it's sometimes difficult to get a hold of someone. Rather than just saying, hey, I'm new, can you train me? If you can use some kind of just human finesse to say the same thing, right? Like, you're kind of giving this person a compliment. Hey, you're an expert in flow cytometry, and I've heard about your expertise. Can you help me? It's just going to serve you a lot better. Then transition to how you can help them, right? This is often rare. If you're just trying to borrow somebody's laser, it may not be entirely obvious. But if you're looking for a job, you can say, I have expertise in X, Y, and Z, whatever the things that will help your reader. And, my skills in X, Y, and Z could really improve your existing expertise in magnetic resonance imaging, right? So you talk about, here's what I have, here's what you're doing. And if we did these together, wow, we could really make some magic, right? That is a surefire recipe to get an interview. I guarantee it. Especially if you say, I read about your recent paper, look at my recent paper, and if we did those together, that's a really great recipe. Particularly then if you went on to say, and I bet we could apply for this funding mechanism, and I bet it would be competitive. Okay. Maybe you're trying to use their equipment. I'm sure your electron microscope is very busy, but if we could study the blah, blah, blah of my samples, it would be interesting to the entire field. That may be a bit of a stretch. Maybe you're just, maybe you're working with Al Pisano and you can just say, Dr. Pisano asked me to analyze these samples with the flow cytometer. Anything other than, hey, can I have a job? Hey, can I have this, your laser, right? Just using some finesse. Then there's some kind of action item. Maybe you have, your CV, don't forget to attach it. Mention the next steps. Are you free next week to discuss the laser? Can I call you to discuss fellowships that might support my postdoc? When's the next orientation session to use the microscope, right? This is what most people get. Most people already do this, okay? It's the other thing that makes you stand out that is often missing. Other kind of thoughts, the use of exclamation point, it's different at different institutions. When I was at the University of Texas, no one used exclamation points for whatever reason. And then at Stanford, like they were kind of a one exclamation point thing. And I had to learn, like, there are certain times when you can use an exclamation point. And this place, I don't know, UC San Diego, I guess it's fairly exclamation point happy. So that's just a cultural difference. Again, proofread it, print it out if it's really important. If this is a really busy person and they have an administrative assistant, be sure to copy the administrative assistant, but assume that they're going to read it. You know, include a signature line that has been proofread, that's correctly formatted. Don't forget please and thank you, that still matters. So I don't know that I'm going to read this to you, but I will. This is the email that I sent to UCSD to get a job at UCSD as a professor. So, you know, 3 paragraphs. Hey, I'm writing for this position. I'm a postdoc with Gambier. I have this K99. It got a perfect impact score of 10. Here's my interests. And then I spent this whole paragraph talking about how I will be useful to UC San Diego. Well, I'll work with Ken Vecchio and Jan Lau on bioglass and ceramic particles. I'll work with Bob Matry and Trogler on their ultrasound thing. I could work with Lianfeng Zhang on drug delivery. I could work with Xiaochen Chen on scaffolds. I could work with Joe Wong and Sadek Esner on these little micromotors. And then I also do plasmonics. So wow, look, I can work with everyone in your department. I'm perfect. You should hire me, right? And so I'm indirectly saying, look at all this stuff. But here's the thing. When I was applying for faculty jobs, this was just one letter out of 30. I sent about 30 applications out. So I had to rewrite this middle paragraph every time, right? And so it's hard, right? It's hard work, but you know what? I ended up getting 5 offers and they were all at good places. And so if you want good results, you have to put in the effort. And so and it shines through, right? Search committees know if they're just, you know, this is the same letter that you sent to every other institution. It's really easy to see it. So if there's one thing I can recommend is to customize and tailor your cover letters and your emails when you're trying to get jobs. Okay, where are we on time? Letters of recommendation. Let me, this should be good. Letters of recommendation are more important in academia than most fields. I'm 40 and I still have to ask people for letters of recommendation. It kind of bothers me. I feel like at some point my record should just stand on its own, and people should be able to assess me based on my record. But for whatever reason, in academia, they still use letters of recommendation a lot. They do this for jobs, for grants, for promotions. You probably need this for fellowships. I think the reason is that hiring and firing people takes longer in academia. And, you know, these faculty jobs are generally for life. And so you don't want to hire a jerk. And so people kind of use these letters as a way of assessing, okay, is this person both a good scientist and not a jerk? So you try to get as much information as possible. So how to write or how to ask for a letter of recommendation? Well, first is to choose carefully. Just like a form letter versus a customized email, is obvious. If it's a letter of recommendation from someone who doesn't know you very well, it's also pretty obvious, right? So start fostering these relationships now, right? So who are these people? Well, they're generally your previous supervisors. And if you're really brand new, they're people who taught you in class. And so, but there's like 100 other people in your class. So how do you build a relationship with your professor to the point that they can write you a letter of recommendation? Well, you can go to office hour, you can ask questions in class, you can you can try to stand out. So if you're already a PhD student or a master's student, these are obviously the people who are your primary professor, but they're also people on your committee. Maybe there are people who you have TA'd for. These are people who are interested in a related field, but it needs to be someone who knows you fairly well. Okay, you don't have to be going to lunch with this person, but they need to somehow kind of be familiar with your work. The other thing you can do, and I did this a lot, is to straight up ask them if they'll write you a good letter. And so when I was needing letters of recommendation, a lot of times I would say, hey, Professor so-and-so, and of course I would do it nicer than this, but would you feel comfortable writing me a great letter for this job I'm applying for at UC San Diego? And that gave them the opportunity to say no. And I didn't get my feelings hurt if they said no, right? And so that is a good skill that you can use, is say, would you feel comfortable writing a great letter for me? You also want to start early. This is no fun. I don't like doing this. No one likes doing this. Hopefully you have lots of interactions with them so that you can keep bugging them about this. You also want to follow up to make sure the letter came through, whether the letter's going to NIH, the letter's going to, wherever you're applying. Ask the administrative assistant, ask the person directly, hey, have you sent this letter? And so, yeah, you want to stay on top of it. The writer will need the following things, generally a description of the honor and position, your resume or CV, and then, preferences or other institutions. So, if this letter is really important, if you really want this job, then tell them, and the person will generally spend the extra effort to make it an even better letter. But the most common thing they need is a pre-written letter. And this is my standard response when people ask me for a letter of recommendation, is to say, yes, please prepare a draft and I will finalize and send. That's what I always say, because I just don't have the bandwidth to do these from scratch every time. Especially, like, we don't have secretaries here. We don't have any administrative assistants here. Most people at UCSD don't. So this kind of stuff could easily take up 5-6 hours a week. So I've got to have a pre-written letter. Okay. So so now you had someone say, yes, I will write you a letter, but send me a draft and I will finalize. So now you have to write your own letter of recommendation. Okay. And guess what? I wrote most of my own letter of recommendation when I was applying for faculty jobs too. Okay. So, here are some tricks. The first one is to be specific, right? I just wrote a letter of recommendation for this person for the NSF GRFP, and I thought it was one of the best. I actually wrote it from scratch, and the first sentence was, so-and-so is the kind of person who can take a television apart and put it back together in working order, right? Like, that's a great opening sentence because it catches people's attention, right? And if I would have said, so-and-so is a great student in my lab, like, go to sleep, right? Like that's what every other letter is going to say, but you're like, oh, wow, okay, this is the kind of person who can take a television apart and put it back together. Sounds like a pretty good engineer, right? Okay, so a good letter should be specific. It should differentiate and compare. It should be plausible, right? You can't say like, this person is going to cure cancer single-handedly, right? It should also state the letter writer's qualifications briefly and be customized. So that goes back to being specific. Here's, so I'm going to use some of the letters that I wrote for myself whenever I was applying to be a professor here. Here's a bad example. Ken Vecchio was the chair of my department at the time. Dear Professor Vecchio, I am chairman and professor of the Department of Radiology at Stanford, and this letter is written with the highest possible level of enthusiasm for Dr. Jokerst's application to be an assistant professor at UC San Diego. He's a perfect fit for this position due to his strong interest in nanoparticle-based molecular imaging, outstanding track record of fundraising, and commitment to teaching and service. So, okay, this is okay, but if you would take out Jesse Jokerst's name and put in Brian Smith's name or Christina Zavaleta's name or any of the people who I was postdocing with at the time, the letter would have read just the same, right? Because Brian Smith and Christina Zavaleta also had a strong interest in nanoparticle-based molecular imaging, a good track record of funding, and commitment to teaching and service, right? It's vague. So main problem in all of these letters of recommendation is that they are generic, they're vague. It can't be forced. And so this has to come from actual time that you spent together. And so that's why you have to kind of cultivate these relationships now. So on my letter for the person who could put the television apart, take it apart and put it back together, the next paragraph was, here's another example. I was having trouble with this lyophilizer in my lab. It was, a $15,000 piece of equipment, but it was leaking. And some of the other students in the lab were going to buy a new manifold or buy a new system, and it was really expensive. So I told this new person to go look at it. And they just took off this one valve and put a cork in it and fixed the system. And this solution that this person came up with cost 25 cents and it took 5 minutes. So that's like a great story, right? Human beings are meant to listen to stories. Our brains are programmed. So when I can tell, hey, let me tell you about this story about the time this person came up with a very simple, cheap, easy solution to what seemingly was a complicated problem, it just is it's a better letter because it's authentic. Okay. So going back to my example of my own letter of recommendation, here are things that are vague. Jesse has many lab skills that he will use to solve biomedical problems. Jesse led many outstanding research projects when he was in my lab, which led to many great publications. If you're working on your own letter of recommendation and you can take out your name and put in one of your lab mates' names, it's probably too generic, right? Because Brian Smith had many lab skills and Christina Zavaleta had many lab skills, okay? So I'm gonna read this to you because I think it's a good example of something that's specific. My recommendation of Jesse is based on our work together. This is a pretty good sentence. You can steal this sentence if you want. My recommendation of Yash is based on our work together, okay? Shortly after he joined the Gambier lab, he approached me about a project related to EGFR via Raman nanoparticles. Others in the Gambier group had used these particles before, but Jesse's work was the first to do true functional imaging of a cancer-specific marker. In fact, 3 other postdocs had tried to correlate nanoparticle signal to the expression of a cell surface biomarker, but could not overcome problems related to nonspecific binding. Jesse's talents in chemistry and nanotechnology made this possible. This worked because Jesse used a non-traditional chemical linker, which is one example of his creative problem-solving ability. My role in the project, my meaning the letter writer here, one of my mentors. My role was to provide the EGFR specific ligand. Jesse did the conjugation, characterization, etc. Jesse validated this contrast agent and wrote a paper that was published in Small. Then we used something related for Nature Medicine, right? Like, see how this is based on, this is not vague, because you could not take out Jesse's name and put in Brian Smith or Christina Zavaleta, because they didn't do this project, right? They didn't do this chemistry. And so that's why this is a good paragraph. Differentiate and compare. So bad would be, Jesse was a fantastic student, one of the best I've ever trained. Good would be, I have supervised hundreds of postdoctoral fellows over the last 20 years, and these people are at all of these institutions. Dr. Jokerst is clearly as good as these other people. He's in the top 2%. He publishes 3 first author papers every year for the last 3 years. No one in my lab comes close, right? Differentiate and compare. Be customized. So bad would be, I know Jesse will be a huge asset to your department. He's going to work well with other people. This is for when I applied to UW up in Seattle, and my mentor wrote, we already collaborate with many members of the Seattle community, including X, Y, and Z. Jesse's work with ultrasound and photoacoustic imaging is a perfect fit for their ovarian cancer work. I know Jesse will integrate well with these groups. I will miss having him in my group, blah, blah, blah. Here are my assistants if you want to contact me. Okay, so does that make sense? These are pretty key points. The good news is you only really need like 1 or 2 of these little stories in a letter of recommendation, right? So I remember when I would hear talks and I was a new student, I would be like, well, I just don't know anybody. And so how do I start getting these interactions with people? How do I get to know people well enough? How do I start fostering these relationships now? And the good news is you know, like my mentors, that I was at Stanford for 6 years. So any of these people that wrote me letters, we had probably, you know, a dozen stories that they could have told about me. And then I only, you know, described 1 or 2. So you really only need like 1 or 2 great episodes with a mentor in order for them to be able to write you a letter of recommendation. Okay. One other tip, just for both when you speak and when you write, is this trick called CAR, which is context, action, result. And people tend to jump right into the action. And particularly when you interview people and you say, you know, tell me about your previous work. Oh, well, I do next gen sequencing. Okay, well, why? And what is the results? So that's the context and the action. So try to remember this when you speak and write. So the context is why you did it, what worked or did not work previously, and why this is important. The result is what you can accomplish due to the action and the long-term implications. So here's the context, action, and result. If this was the paragraph when I was making this EGFR thing. So if you go back and look at this paragraph, it talks about the context. Oh, 3 other people had tried this and couldn't get it to work. Here's the action. Jesse did these things, and here's the result. We published 2 papers. Okay. So this is a pretty good recipe for writing one of these letters.
Hi, Dr. Jokerst. Real quick, there was a question from the audience. How do I be specific or customize the emails if I do not have lab experience or solve these problems you have described?
Yeah, I mean, that's tough. And but the thing is, you probably have some kind of specific interaction with the person you're asking to write a letter, or else you wouldn't have asked them. right? And so maybe, you can talk about that time that, you went to their office hour and you just had trouble understanding this one concept and they explained it to you a couple times and then you learned it and you could explain it to other people. There has to be something, and so it may not be lab, it may not be, maybe you had the best grade in the class, maybe you've improved the most, maybe you got an F on the first exam and then you got an A on the final exam. Maybe, hopefully there's something, and if there's not, then you could try to make something, right? Maybe you can say, maybe you should go to this person's office hour. Maybe you should, when campus is open again, ask to go to lunch with a professor. Maybe you can, something, try to force something. Yeah. So it's actually coming up on the top of the hour. I had a few more slides about cover letters for submitting articles, but I think we'll skip that because it's the same concept of writing, of think about who your author is, think about who your audience is. And I'm happy to send out these slides if anybody wants them. So other questions?
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Jokerst. If anyone has any questions, raise your hand or put them in the chat or just turn your video on.
Hey, Jesse, can I ask the question?
Yeah, go for it.
So, right, I saw you gave an example of the email that's when you are applying for the assistant professor position.
Yeah.
So it seems like the body of this email, the second paragraph, the longest one, is mostly about how you can collaborate with the other people in this department.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, is that kind of, I guess it's also depend on the field. So is that more important to emphasize what you can do independently by yourself?
Good.
Or
yeah. Here's the thing. One thing that often people do badly in their cover letter is just repeat the things that are in the CV. So what you don't want to just do is say, hey, I've published this paper in Nature Biotech and this paper in Angavante, and this is what they're about, right? Because that's already in your CV. So it may be field specific, but really the cover letter's your chance to, kind of explain, here's things that is not elsewhere. Here's what I'd like to do in the future. Here's just a little bit more about me. And so I thought when I was applying, I felt like that was kind of the best use of my time, is to explain, how I was integrating into that department. But if you look at, are my slides still up?
not it.
No, it's not. This is probably the first paragraph is probably the most important. Let me get back here. This paragraph right here, you can see it now, right?
Right.
Yeah, this is the most important because this is what caught their attention, right? So put all of your best stuff right here.
Right, in the first paragraph.
Yeah, and then, your second one, it's kind of up to you if you think that the field is different. But I just wanted to talk about how I thought I could serve the department, right? Like how can I be useful to UC San Diego rather than how can UC San Diego be useful to Jesse Jokerst, right? That was just kind of my thinking, is how will I show that I have benefit?
Right, that makes sense. Make a lot of sense. So
yeah,
is that similar to the job talk? So when you're talking about your proposal, you also talk about how you are going to collaborate with the others.
I think so. Yeah, I mean that second talk, the chalk talk or research talk, is often how you would see integrating into the department.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah. Okay, well, you guys have probably had a long day of Zooming, so your brains are probably mush. I know mine is mostly mush at this point. So if I can put my email in the chat, or it's easy to find. If you search for Jesse Jokerst, I'm the only one here. So I'm generally pretty good on email if you have any other questions. And thanks again for organizing, Ariel.
Oh, of course. Thank you so much for giving me time. This was great.
Okay.
Super useful.
Great. Okay, thanks everybody.
Thank you.